The other reason behind these conspiracy theories is it's actually a mathematical theory. Again, I'm more ignorant about mathematics than I would like. So I'm not going to go into all the explanations of this theory, but I will have some links to a discussion about it placed on the media broadcast. It's called the Ramsey Theory. And I'd rather just read from a news article. I'll just discuss this very briefly, what this Ramsey Theory is. And I can see that this one is from Science Alert. It's a news article by Science Alert called, it's going to link to a TED education talk titled The Origin of Countless Conspiracy Theories. This mathematical principle makes us believe in crazy conspiracy theories. There's no denying that humans are incredible creatures. Putting a rover on Mars, detecting gravitational waves, finding the Higgs boson. But then there's one peculiar behaviour persists, and that is our belief in the strangest conspiracy theories. What's even stranger than us needing anything to believe in is that we pretty much can't avoid it. We humans love to find order in chaos, and I believe that God made us that way. We're designed to see patterns. That's why when we look up at the clouds, we start wanting to know what shape they're making and what they look like. Humans love to find order in chaos, and from trying to find order in chaos, we get Melville, the soothsayer, the faked moon landing, climate change denial. As this video will point out that it links to, this TED Ed talk, if you got the entire text of Herman Melville's Moby Dick and arranged the entire text of that book into a rectangle, you'll find within that now brought together letters, as you squished it into a rectangle, you would find the prediction about the Martin Luther King assassination and the death of Princess Diana. Weird? Right? Well, not really, because in a world of random chaos, we humans rely on order, and our brains will do whatever it takes to find that order, whether it's finding word patterns in a mess of letters, or familiar shapes in the constellations above us. That's why you have that game, what's it called, when they have random letters and you have to try and find the word. We're built to do that. We're built to try and find order in chaos. This is all explained by a mathematical principle called Ramsey Theory. It's named after a British mathematician and philosopher, Frank P. Ramsey. Ramsey Theory states that given enough elements in a set or structure, some particular interesting pattern among them is guaranteed to emerge. So he shows how even just with a small group, you will almost inevitably, really inevitably find some pattern. One example they usually give to demonstrate this is if you have some people at a party. Imagine you're at a party with 6 other guests without knowing anything at all about these people. It's a mathematical inevitability that some group of 3 of those people either all know each other or at this party have never met before, based on the number of possibilities that can be applied to the group. But the mathematical equation it takes to figure this out with just 6 people gets out of control the moment you start adding more and more people in, because the number of possibilities becomes overwhelming, even for as few as 40 or 50 people. Seriously, if you wanted to use this equation to find a group of 5 people in a party of 48 who either all know each other or have never met, you'd end up with more possibilities than there are atoms in the universe. That's how prone we are to seeing the formation of patterns, even within a small group. It's a mathematical inevitability that the stars in our sky are arranged in familiar shapes, and the letters in a novel appear to conceal a prophecy, and we humans have been conditioned to find them. But just as maths makes conspiracy theories an inevitability, so too does it render even the most persistent ones impossible. You can read more about it, but let's just say that the suppression of a cancer cure would have been leaked by someone inside Big Pharma in just 3.2 years. So mathematically, they can show you how prone and easy it is for us to locate conspiracy theories, because in even a small group set of data, you are inevitably going to find patterns. And if I can say so, if you have a nice big group of data, let's say dates, and you're going to expand that group of data on dates to include all types of numbering systems and a dozen different calendars, it doesn't become so strange to suddenly decide that there's going to be a nuclear attack on Nashville on July 18, because you've taken a huge set of data and with no rules, with no principles of parable teaching, just looked for an abstract pattern that has no meaning behind it. This is the type of methodology that's being used by it was used by Mary Stuart Ralph back in the 1980s. It wasn't new. It was used in 1798 by Jedediah Morse. It continues through Protestantism. It continues through Adventism. It continues through Walter Veith. It continues through those who left this movement and have held on to their conspiracy theories, and it's now their dominant methodology. So what has separated us? So all of this also comes back to our discussion on vaccines. A physicist calculated the probability that 4 widely believed conspiracy theories could have lasted this long without being uncovered. And mathematically speaking, it's not looking good for moon landing deniers or anti-vaxxers. The 2016 study revealed that for an old-fashioned cover-up to stay under wraps for 10 years, fewer than 1,000 people would need to be involved. To remain secret for a century, the number of people aware would need to be below 125. Considering that the most popular conspiracy theories would realistically involve thousands of people, the odds aren't great. My results suggest that any conspiracy with over a few hundred people rapidly collapses, and big science conspiracies would not be sustainable. When we start talking about vaccines, we're using the same thing. This, why is it? You could expand on that. You could write it a little bit more carefully, and talk about correlation equaling causation. So I'm going to have posted in the media broadcast an article by The Atlantic that's titled Correlation, Causation and Vaccination. Why is it that people can see little children develop these illnesses, particularly the one we were discussing, the autism? How can you see a 3-year-old develop autism and bring it back to vaccination? And the reason is usually that what is happening is we're saying correlation equals causation, and that is not a good principle to work off. I know many children who are healthy who were show no signs until 3 years old, and they start having seizures. Children reach a developmental age where those things actually start to be demonstrated. And because parents are looking for a reason, why did my child just have a seizure? They're going to start looking for a cause. So some parents will say, well, she fell and hit her head, and then the next week she had a seizure. And while it may seem that the fall caused the seizure, there's no evidence for that. This correlation, the fact that these two things occurred within a similar set of time, does not equal causation. It doesn't mean that one caused the other. But whenever you have something traumatic occur, and I know that there can be a great deal of emotion, painful emotion in this argument, it's usually because people are trying to find an answer to something they don't understand. So they're going to go back to this why is it argument and go correlation equals causation. But to not get sidetracked on the subject of vaccines, I'm going to have some of those articles put in that group. So I want us to have a little look at just one quote of Walter Veith. If we can see what has been done here, these two parts of what can build a conspiracy theory. First, ignorance. Why is it? Could it be? Second, the Ramsey theory. The fact that you are going to find patterns. You're going to find a 666 in a random group of numbers. You just will. If that group of numbers, even a small set group of numbers, the chances are it is inevitable there will be some type of pattern. Depending on the size of the group, highly likely that pattern will include a 666. We used two examples of how ignorance is built into these conspiracy theories. The death of Princess Diana, just basic ignorance about different medical systems across the world, ignorance about climate change, and the melting polar ice caps and rising sea levels. And then we briefly looked at Ramsey theory, which I will link to articles who can explain it better than I can. But I will erase these. And there's just one quote by Walter Veith, really just one paragraph that I want us to take apart and see how we have both ignorance and a misunderstanding of the Ramsey theory built into this statement. And I'm going to be honest, both for time and for sanity, I didn't watch a lot of him to get to this quote. I watched about 5 minutes and picked the first paragraph he said that contained any actual information. It's not that I haven't watched him, I grew up on him. I've seen, I think, his entire Total Onslaught series. But I'm just going to take this one paragraph because it was the first thing I came across in his video. But it gives an example of his whole mindset. And I know that this is an example of his whole mindset because he still continues to promote the Total Onslaught series. And I remember keenly the way he built his arguments in the Total Onslaught. Walter Veith, quoting him, he says, "Look at some false flags, some distractions. The media tells us who is in control. And who is the troublemaker? Who is the media telling you the troublemaker is? It's saying the terrorists in the Middle East." So he's framing this around terrorism, 9/11. Who has ever been to the Middle East? Who has ever seen those countries? So you'll remember we actually referred to this quote a couple of weeks ago when we spoke about Sunnis, Shias, Iran, Saudi Arabia. Who has ever seen those countries? Who has ever travelled through Syria? I travelled through Syria from the south to the north and from the north to the south before it was destroyed. So before the Civil War. And before it was destroyed, I thought it was already destroyed. It was like going back into the Middle Ages. People on donkeys riding around with long beards. Speaking now with sarcasm. They were so frightening I thought the whole world would quake in fear just looking at them. So that he's being sarcastic. They don't look frightening to him. Ridiculous. And if you look at their society and how they live, there must be something else that must be creating that false flag. So what is he going to do? He's going to take you to come and look at Syria. Now he's going to take you hundreds of at least thousands of kilometers away from where the actual issues were. They weren't in Syria. They were in Saudi Arabia and Pakistan and Afghanistan. Not in Syria. Syria is Shia. hoping we could remember that study. So he's also going to take you far away from the actual scene of where terrorism was fomented. But what is he doing? He's saying, why is it that when you go to Syria, you see people on donkeys riding around with long beards who don't look fearful? How come you see that when you go to Syria? And you're not seeing these terrorists that the media is telling you exist there. So it's the why is it? And now he's going to introduce the could it be? Could it be that these Syrian terrorists are a false flag for someone else that is controlling behind the scenes and was behind 9/11 and these attacks? So first of all, I already tried in that other presentation to deal with the ignorance that's inbuilt. And it becomes really easy once you start going into that history, and we did. We showed Iran, it's Shia. Saudi Arabia is Sunni. They are both church-state models. We used a parable example as if Shia was Catholic and Saudi Arabia, Sunni, was Protestant. The reason we labelled one Catholic, one Protestant is because one believes in taking care of sacred sites and images. Essentially, the Sunnis see the Shias as idolaters. The same way a Protestant would look at an image of Mary and all that Catholic regalia and call it idolatry. What you have is two church-state governments where the church controls the state. You go back to the Middle Ages, that's what you had. So as you can imagine, it's like in there they have this same problem as we saw in the 1260, where you have a Catholic-run country and a Protestant-run country, and in the end all you get is a lot of bloodshed. We showed how that fomented in the 1979 to 89 Afghanistan war, when over here in Afghanistan you had it bordering Pakistan, and how Saudi Arabia sent their radical clerics to create hundreds of religious schools to export Wahhabism. It's a radical sect of Sunnism that they have made go mainstream through these different efforts. And it's all to give legitimacy to their right to rule the throne and the sacred Muslim sites of Islam, Mecca and Medina, that exist in Saudi Arabia. So to give themselves legitimacy, they have to export their sect of Islam. They saw their opportunity in the Afghanistan war, and it spread through Pakistan, and that is what became in Pakistan, in that one town that we said that became like the birthplace of all of this. You had the father of jihad, the founder of jihad, call over Osama bin Laden, and they became the two co-creators of Al-Qaeda. The same town, same time period, the men, names that we don't know very well, the men that became the early founders of ISIS, before they called it ISIS, those terrorist organisations springing up as this radical version of Islam was particularly fomented by primarily Saudi Arabia. Iran, they have their own. They have, what's it called? Hezbollah. They have Hezbollah. That is essentially a Shiite radical, really quite a terrorist organisation. But you would never see Hezbollah. If you were to put Hezbollah and ISIS in one room, they would kill each other, literally. They are not in agreement because one is Shia and one is Sunni. And it's this Sunni branch that created Al-Qaeda, it led to ISIS. That's why you find the vast majority of the terrorists at 9/11 were Saudi Arabian. It's come out of here. And what Walter Veith has done is said, I went to Syria, I travelled around and stared at the people and they didn't look scary. They didn't look like terrorists who would have hit at 9/11. First of all, wrong country. Second of all, Shia. not 𝗬cie. And last of all, I don't want to get into who he is as a person. This isn't a comment about him. This is a comment about this statement. This statement is racist. It's racist regarding how it sees what the Middle East is capable of. How much of modern Western society we owe to the Middle East, right down to the mathematics we were discussing before. How much do we owe to the Asian regions? What did they give us? So it's also, the statement, don't mean to comment on the man, the statement is racist. Essentially saying they wouldn't be capable of terrorism. But leaving racism to one side, although it is part of our discussion, his whole methodology is particularly based on ignorance. And again, he uses questions. Why is it that I went to Syria and I didn't see people who looked scary? And now he's going to bring in the could it be? And again, he doesn't just use questions, he also uses sarcasm. And it's so hard when someone teaches with questions and then with sarcasm to actually get into the intent of what their point is. So he's continuing with the sarcasm now. He says, no, it's the Zionists that are in control. The bankers, the money men, the Rothschilds, and all of these, they're in control. He says that kind of with sarcasm. Have you heard of all of these? Here is an interesting one. Then he's going to quote from the Jewish encyclopedia that describes the Rothschild family as the guardians of the papal treasure. Rothschilds is a German word meaning red shield. Who were the ones who wore red shields in war? The Roman army. This is the Roman army. These are the front Jews. They are papal Jews. Papal people in disguise. Where is Rome leading us to? So he's bringing in these two parts of what would form a conspiracy theory. He's using ignorance, because this actual statement is so incredibly ignorant. He's bringing in the Ramsey theory, which is essentially that in any set of data you're going to see something that looks like a pattern. And he's moulding them two together. And again, behind what he's saying, although you can't pin it because of the sarcasm and the questions, is still racism. He is saying that the Jews are in control. He just wants to get out of it by saying they're not your average Jews. These are papal Jews. These are Zionists and Jews who are being controlled by the Pope. So he's still spreading this anti-Semitic Zionist message that is still racist, but he can back out of that by saying it's not their fault. These Jews are controlled by others behind the scenes, and he's giving evidence for it. Rothschild is a German word meaning red shield. Why is it that their name means red shield? And if you look over here, who wore red shields in war? The Roman army. This is the Roman army. So he's going to take you from a why is it to a could it be to a conspiracy theory that's actually completely illogical. Based on a name. I'm going to quote from Spectrum magazine. Please, no one stone me from that. This is a Spectrum magazine article on Walter Veith. I just want to take one point they make. Is it really just a coincidence that Veith is the Germanized name for Vitus, who was one of the 14 holy helpers of the Roman Catholic Church and who also happens to be the patron saint of actors? To repeat that. Is it just... I'm going to mute all, if we can all please try and stay muted for the audio. Is it really just a coincidence that Veith is the Germanized name for Vitus, who was one of the 14 holy helpers of the Roman Catholic Church, and who also happens to be the patron saint of actors. So if I was to use Walter Veith's methodology, I would say, why is it his name was one of 14 holy helpers of the Roman Catholic Church, and who also happens to be the patron saint of actors? Could it be that he's an actor controlled by the Pope of Rome as one of their 14 holy helpers? No. As Spectrum magazine says, the sane answer is no, it is just a coincidence. Walter Veith is not an actor acting on behalf of the Roman Catholic Church. But if you were to use his methodology, that's the type of conclusion you would have to come to. So back to what he has said here. I'm going to erase this, or I'll keep it up for now. He says the Zionists, they are in control. The bankers, the money men, the Rothschilds. He claims to not believe that, but what he's saying is that they are in control, but behind the Rothschilds, the bankers and the Zionists is the Pope. And what do they all have in common? Zionists refers to Jews. The Rothschilds were a Jewish family. Bankers were associated with Jews. This is all the Jews. So this is all the Jews that he's referring to. And he says they're front Jews, they're papal Jews. The Rothschilds were the Roman army, and he's going to take you to a quote to prove that. And he takes you to the Jewish encyclopedia that describes the Rothschilds as the guardians of the papal treasure. So I want us to actually look into the Rothschilds just briefly. The first thing I noticed, but he really tried to skip over that quickly, is this Jewish encyclopedia that he's quoting from was the 1906 Jewish encyclopedia. So just so we know, that's 114 years ago that they were described as the guardians of the papal treasure. And this video, I believe it was from 2018. So it's not going back even a decade or so. This is recent. And he takes into no account the fact that this Jewish encyclopedia is well over 100 years old. So the Rothschilds were a wealthy banking Jewish family in the 1800s. Some of their descendants spread around the globe, and many are wealthy. But just to put that in context today, Fly walked in front of the camera if I went fuzzy. Just to put that in context today, the Rothschilds alive today in 2020, the richest Rothschild alive today is worth $1.7 billion. So this is Benjamin Rothschild. This is today in 2020. Benjamin Rothschild. He's worth $1.7 billion, as documented by Forbes' wealthiest people alive. That may sound significant and impressive, but that is number 1,121 in the list of wealthiest people alive. So the wealthiest Rothschild alive today is the 1,121 richest person on earth. When you consider that this is supposed to be the wealthy family that controls the elite behind the scenes in this satanic deep state, that starts to sound crazy. The wealthiest, the 1,121st richest person alive. The closest thing to any Rothschild family business that relates to the Rothschilds as a family is the Rothschilds Group investment banking company, whose annual profit is $70 million. The largest company in the world, Walmart, its annual profits of $120 billion annually is almost 2,000 times as much. So when you talk about the money the Rothschilds have today, we're not talking about any type of scale like what you would have seen back 100, 150 years ago. Another point, central banks are state institutions and have nothing to do with any Rothschilds. Central banks are run by states, not by billionaires. So where did these conspiracy theories about the Rothschilds come from? The Rothschilds family were Jewish. It is an aspect of anti-Semitism, the belief that Jews are powerful behind-the-scenes manipulators of global events. So what happened is you're going back hundreds of years, and if you were to go back hundreds of years, you would see that anti-Semitism was just everywhere. Jews were only allowed to live in ghettos. If I can try and find... Jews were forbidden in some places from owning any property. So you had, if I was to take a country, this country has a group of Jews and it has a group of Christians. And the Jewish people are forbidden from owning any property. They're segregated and forced to live in ghettos. The Christians, because of their belief in certain passages of Scripture, believe that they cannot lend any money. They don't believe that it's right for a Christian to lend money to anyone because they believe that's anti-biblical. So Christians don't become active in the banking system because of their Christian beliefs about lending money. The Jews don't hold to that same belief. They don't read Scripture and say that money should not be lent. So you have a society which is completely anti-Semitic, where the Jews are segregated, they're not allowed to own property, they're forced to live in ghettos, but where they're also needed, and they're needed for the financial system to work, because Christians cannot loan money to each other. They don't believe in lending back then, but the Jews do. So if a Christian needs to borrow money, where do you go? You could only go to a Jew. So the Jews became very prevalent in the banking system. It's not because they had some deep agenda, it was because it was one of the few things they could do to earn a livelihood. And it was because of that anti-Semitism that segregated them, while also the Christians needed them to finance their businesses. So it was really the prevalence of Jews within banking was built because of that system, that difference in religious belief that related to lending. Also, Jews recognized that as they lived in anti-Semitic environments, as they were persecuted, that the more highly educated their children were, the more their children were likely to hold on to their Jewish faith. So they became very conscious of education, and they would do everything they could to get their children good educations. So out of this desire to keep the Jewish faith alive and to spread it from generation to generation, you have two things emerge. First of all, they became very highly educated despite the anti-Semitism, and second of all, they became very prevalent in the banking system despite the anti-Semitism because of the different beliefs in money lending. So it is true that Jews were both wealthy, highly educated in some areas, the ones that weren't still stuck in the ghettos in the system, and they were also prevalent in the banking system. That's something that is logical. Where it goes is somewhere illogical. The Rothschilds were just one of those families. They lived in the ghettos, they became involved in money lending because only the Jews could, and they built themselves up into the banking world, and they did become extremely wealthy. I think I referred to a conspiracy theory back when I read it was actually by a Russian-led conspiracy theory journal that spoke about the Rothschilds and the Jews, or the Jews or Zionists, as being behind the 9/11 attacks. It's the exact same thing Walter Veith is. He's talking about terrorism, 9/11, and then Zionists and the Catholic Church, and he's really wrapping it all into quite a tight bundle. So this created anti-Semitism right back from around the late 1800s. It was particularly prevalent in the Catholic Church. When we've done the studies on the counterfeit of this, the counterfeit of modern Israel, where we went back and looked at modern Babylon and we saw Hitler's Pope, the way the Catholic Church responded to World War II as Satan was trying to resurrect this modern Babylon, this counterfeit of modern Israel. We saw that within the Catholic Church, just generally through the society, this anti-Semitism was very prevalent. And because of this, partly because of this anti-Semitism, largely because of it, you did have Jews become involved in revolutions. So if you're a persecuted minority and you're oppressed for a great length of time, what's going to happen? When there's a revolution, are you going to join that revolution? Yes. So you can see that in America right now. You can see that in the French Revolution. An oppressed society that has been subjugated for so long will react by forming part of this revolution. So when you had the Russian Revolution, were Jews involved in it? Yes, there were Jews that were part of the Russian Revolution. The cause is a natural one. They were oppressed and persecuted under the Tsar. But what Hitler does is he particularly takes this idea about the Jews as being wealthy, as being involved in the banking system, as being involved in the rise of communism and the Russian Revolution, and it creates an entire conspiracy theory around the Zionists. And this is what is going to develop into the Holocaust. He blamed the Jews for the loss of Germany in World War I. It was a Zionist deep state. He blamed the Jews for the Russian Revolution. And it's all behind this anti-Semitism. It was also rife within the Catholic Church. Really through most of society, it was quite acceptable for people back then to hold on to this conspiracy theories and anti-Semitism. So you have something that's actually quite logical. Jews involved in the Russian Revolution. Not just Jews, but they were there. They were there because they were persecuted under the Tsar and they wanted freedom like anyone else. So the Rothschilds, they became quite wealthy in the early 1800s. As they worked within the money lending system, their business continued to grow. And then particularly when it comes to the Napoleonic Wars, they started lending money to different states in the Napoleonic Wars. Again, they can lend, Christians can't. As William I, Elector of Hesse, refused to join the French supporting Confederation of the Rhine at its formation in 1806, William I is threatened by Napoleon. In Frankfurt, he asks his agent, Mayer Aschel Rothschild, to convey bonds worth £600,000 he has received from Britain to subsidise his army to safety in England. So the Rothschilds were working between William I and Napoleon, and they were lending money in those wars. The Rothschild, however, used the money for his own ends with the help of his sons, Nathan Rothschild in London and James Rothschild in Paris. They first used the money to finance Wellington's army in Spain's war against Napoleon at advantageous terms of interest. In a notable coup in 1815, Nathan Rothschild spreads the rumour that Napoleon had won the Battle of Waterloo, causing London stock prices to collapse. He then bought a large quantity of equities at the bottom of the market, profiting handsomely as prices rose once the truth about the Battle of Waterloo emerged. In 10 years, the Rothschilds had accumulated a fortune of £11 million, and that is their money, not our money, so you can imagine interest. And they were able to then formalise a European-wide network of family-led financial institutions. If that sounds reasonable to you, that was the plot of a 1940 Nazi-released film titled The Rothschilds, and none of that's true. What Hitler did was he took the Rothschilds and he created a film in 1940 that showed the Rothschilds stabbing William I in the back and then Napoleon in the back, using both these state governments to finance a fortune, or to create a fortune of £11 million. How they crashed the London economy. This deep state conspiracy theory about the Rothschilds is not true. It's a plot summary of a film released by the Nazis in 1940. It was used to justify the Holocaust. So when we start talking about the Rothschilds, this conspiracy theory, there's absolutely no evidence for it. They built their finances by lending money, working through the banking system. But what Hitler turned that into is a conspiracy theory that's based on no fact. They didn't steal money from William I and then stab him in the back and then use Napoleon in the Battle of Waterloo. It's all just justification for the Holocaust. What did happen? As the Rothschilds were lending money, they weren't lending money discriminatorily, they were lending money to whoever would take it. It's just finances, it's just work. In 1831, Cardinal 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗲𝗃 is elected Pope Gregory XVI. The Rothschilds were considered reliable in conservative circles in Europe because they had worked with the Austrian government to stabilise finances after the Napoleonic Wars. So they hadn't stabbed in the back William I and Napoleon. The Rothschilds are seen as reliable people to do business with. If they had have crashed the London economy, they would not have been seen as reliable with a good reputation as businessmen. People wouldn't have worked with them. But when you have a new pope in 1831 and the Vatican finances are in a dire straits, they're going to turn to who is the most reliable. Initially, there was resistance during the negotiations. So this new papal hierarchy with a new pope, they want to work with the Rothschilds, and there's resistance, particularly from the Roman government and Monsignor Antonio Garibaldi at Paris. However, Alessandro Torlonia, acting for the Vatican, held direct negotiations with James Rothschild and thrashed out an agreement. So the papacy is struggling, it's falling, it's losing its papal states. This is about 43 years after 1798. They need to make some financial agreements. They turn to the Rothschilds because they have a good reputation. There's resistance because a lot of Roman Catholics don't like the Catholic Church getting bailed out by a Jewish family. This did not go over well. But there is an agreement signed on the 30th of November 1831. Thus, in 1832, the Rothschilds' agreement to provide a loan to the Holy See for £400,000, equivalent in 2019 to £37.4 million, came into force. So the Rothschilds lent money to the Vatican in 1831. James Rothschild, head of the Rothschild banking family of France, became the official papal banker. His Naples-based brother, Karl Mayer von Rothschild, geographically closer to Rome, went to meet with Pope Gregory XVI in January of 1832. It was customary for Catholics to show reverence for what they regarded as the Vicar of Christ, to kiss the Pope's feet when meeting him. As a Jew, Karl Rothschild was permitted to simply kiss the ring on his hand instead. This outraged Catholic critics of the deal at the time. So this was a massive scandal for Catholics. The fact that a Jewish family would bail out the Roman Catholic Church to the extent of, in today's dollars, £37 million. And then that one of the heads of that family didn't kiss the Pope's feet. A second loan occurred during the pontificate of Pope Pius IX in the early 1850s with the same members of the Rothschild family. After the collapse of a short-lived revolution short-lived revolutionary Roman Republic, and the restoration of the Papal States. Reports of this loan led to stinging criticisms of Pope Gregory XVI in the Christian, in particular Catholic world, so particularly the Catholic world, but also through the Protestant world as well, almost all of which circulated around the Jewishness of the Rothschilds. So this wasn't the fact that they were the papal bankers, was not some hidden knowledge that Walter Veith dug out. This was a scandal in the 1830s, 40s and 50s. The French poet Alfred de Vigny said, "A Jew now reigns over the Pope and Christianity. He pays monarchs and buys nations." Ludwig Vaughan, a Jewish convert to Lutheranism and a member of the Young Germany movement, stated, "A wealthy Jew kisses his hand while a poor Christian kisses the Pope's feet." So a poor Christian kisses the Pope, the feet of the Pope, and a wealthy Jew only has to kiss his hand. The Rothschilds are assuredly nobler than their ancestor Judas Iscariot. He sold Christ for 30 small pieces of silver. The Rothschilds would buy him if he were for sale. Another prominent example is the mention of the loan in a sonnet by, I won't read his full name, I think they just call him Belly. While Belly found the Rothschilds highly objectionable, for him the Pope was even worse as a weak man who had sold both Rome and the state, and was thus no longer worthy of wearing the papal robes. This was not a deep state Rothschild controlling the world conspiracy theory. They were doing their job. They lent money to William I. They worked through the Napoleonic Wars, or they controlled some of his finances, and they interacted with the Vatican. It was no secret. It was widely acceptable. Let me remind you, in the days when Adventism had a prophet, and is she speaking about any of this? No. If Ellen White was living through this and didn't feel the need to speak about it, to include it in any of her writings, in the dispensation she is living in, why is it somehow secret knowledge we've dug up today? Pope Gregory XVI appointed Cardinal Tosti as the new papal treasurer in July 1834. Tosti attempted to refinance the debt in more favourable terms. Because of the backlash among the Christian and Catholic community by their doing work with this Jewish banking family, Tosti, the new papal treasurer, tried to annul the agreement with the Rothschilds behind their back and to go into a deal with another banking firm in Paris because of this backlash. When he did this, one of the Rothschild heads travelled to Rome, held out his contract and said, "You signed this, you can't back out of this contract." And the Catholic Church was forced by that contract to not go into an agreement with another banking firm. The Rothschilds then tried to leverage their influence within the Vatican to improve conditions for the 15,000 Jews in the Papal States. They asked the Pope to cancel the extra taxes that were levied solely on the Jews, the prohibition on taking property from the ghetto, and the ban on working professionals, and that he abolish evidentiary standards that put them at a disadvantage in court cases. Their requests were declined. So they attempted to improve the lot of their disadvantaged Jews living in the ghettos in the Papal States, but none of that became possible. So when you go back and you see the work the Rothschilds did within the Vatican, yes, going back into the 1800s through the Napoleonic Wars, through the 30s and the 50s and forward, you had the Rothschilds working, doing their job, also working for the Catholic Church as part of their banking system. So when you come to a Jewish encyclopedia that's written in 1906 that says the Rothschilds are the guardians of the papal treasure, as much as that sounds as evidence of a conspiracy theory, it's really not. It's just historical fact. But that is historical fact that was true in 1906, not in 2020 or 2018. It was true in 1906. In 2020, how much influence does the Rothschild family have in the banking system? None. In the finances of the Vatican? None. None of that exists 120 years later. Nearly 200 years after, 190 years after that first loan was entered into. The system no longer works that way. So to use 1830s and 50s and then one sentence from a 1906 encyclopedia to prove this satanic deep state where the Pope controls the Rothschilds, controls the Zionists, controls the terrorists. That's the model he's brought up. Pope, Zionists, Rothschilds, terrorists, 9/11. Think about the evidence that that's actually built on, and there isn't any. In fact, it's built on ignorance. Why is it that they would be listed in a 1906 encyclopedia as being the guardians of papal treasure? Could it be that there is that they have a relationship to the Pope 114 years later? Could it be that this Pope controls the Zionists and that's a reason for 9/11, this satanic Illuminati deep state? Because it can't be here, because it couldn't be. Why is it that Syria is so apparently backward and not intimidating, that terrorists can't arise from the Middle East? Because I walked through Syria and I didn't see any. Can you see that how that methodology is built up? But it's built up the same way Mary Stuart Ralph builds up hers. Can you see the 666, the lyrics from the Coca-Cola advertising campaign, this Beatles song, the lyrics from the Beatles song? She uses the same methodology to come to the same satanic deep state conclusions. And they continue today. You see conspiracy theories surround George Soros. George Soros, he's a wealthy man today, he's a billionaire. And the Republican Party, far right, again, socially conservative Protestantism, they were part of this all the way through. As much as they need Israel where there's going to be 144,000 convert to Christianity. They can't have an Israel that's going to stay Jews. They don't support Jews. They need the Jewish state to bring about the 1,000 years, the coming of Jerusalem, and then 144,000 of those Jews will convert, is what they believe. So just to close, we've just taken one quote by Walter Veith, just 30 seconds of that message. And it's really just one example of what his entire message is built upon. And it's the same thing that we see this socially conservative branch of Protestantism has done since 1798, when he speaks about the Bavarian Illuminati and Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. It's that, why is it, could it be it's the Bavarian Illuminati? How they use this literal to literal interpretation, the enforcement of morality, slavery, Sunday laws in the 1888 history, justifying segregation. And it's what we're seeing today when we see, why is it that there are coronavirus cases where a 5G network pole was just put up? Why is it? Could it be that there's a correlation and that equals causation? Because the 5G networks went online and the coronavirus came, they correlate, therefore there's causation. One caused the other. 5G caused the coronavirus. You start getting into a problem with that the minute you bring some information to that. For example, why is Iran so hard hit by the coronavirus? Even while they try and suppress it and hide it, Iran has no 5G network. The countries, many countries that are suffering under the coronavirus, that are digging mass graves, have no 5G network. But because we're looking for an explanation and we see this correlation, we believe that there's causation. This is what happens to the most conspiracy theories around vaccines, saying correlation equals causation within the first few years of a child's life. It's this type of ignorance where we're all ignorant to some degree about many topics. That's why we research. That's why we have to trust experts in their fields. You have this Ramsey theory that we briefly discussed. We showed how it works through conservative Protestantism, and we're going to come back next week and look at conservative Protestantism. Socially conservative Protestantism, as they stand up and back the Trump administration, and how they have continued with that same methodology. But their methodology always comes back to the same thing. There's a satanic deep state, and the solution is to overthrow that satanic deep state and bring about a Christian nation. So I just want to finish. I know I've gone for a while. I just want to finish on one point. I'll put it over here because a sister asked this in the question time last week. And it was a good question. I just want to address it. The question went something like this. How do we know what to believe of the Adventism that we've grown up with? All that we've heard from Walter Veith, from conservative Adventism, how do we know what to believe? I just want to do something, if you can work with me for a moment. We understand the idea of a one world government. We get that from passages of Daniel and Revelation, particularly Revelation. And we talk about the 10 kings. So, we all can believe in a one world government. This core idea of a one world government, I don't mean to shake that. It's behind what Walter Veith will teach, it's what is behind I will teach. Walter Veith and I both believe in a one world government. But consider the following. What he's going to do is the exact same thing that socially conservative Protestant faction is doing. One world government. We understand that through the 10 kings, which, as we showed before, that was all taught in the 1980s as being this confederation of nations, these 10 nations, and it becomes globalism, both for Protestants and conservative Adventists. Globalism and the UN. Why is Trump so antagonistic towards globalism and the UN? Because his base is socially conservative Protestants, and they have a belief system that is antagonistic to globalism and the UN. So you automatically know what side you're on. 10 kings, globalism and the UN. Behind this all, it's a satanic deep state. So we'll photograph this afterwards and put it on the group. Satanic deep state. Within this deep state, there are these secret societies. And we listed a few. The Rothschilds, who are now at their most wealthiest, the 1,121st richest men on the Forbes list. Rothschilds, Illuminati, George Soros, Bill Gates, all of that faction. They tie this with growing immorality. One of the evidences is this growing immorality. That's why they'll take you to songs, lyrics from bands like the Beatles, etc. And you can know all this. None of this is obvious to you. None of this is in the open. You can only know this through secret knowledge. Secret knowledge handed from person to person, or through observing hand signals, or numbers, or logos, or through these subtle evidences that you'll find flashed. So you have to look for these evidences through things like 666, song lyrics, logos, etc. This was behind Mary Stuart Ralph. It's exactly what Walter Veith does. So this is one side. All believing this, the danger is this one world government, it's what's coming. We also believe in this one world government. We don't go to Revelation and redefine it to that extent. But consider this. We believe in the 10 kings. But we're not going to approach it through conspiracy theories. This is going to be approached through conspiracies. This is going to be approached through parables. So where do you find 10? 10 of something, a group of 10. The tribes of Israel. You have the 2 and the 10. So when you have the 10 tribes, how are they structured? You have 10, but does each one of those 10 have autonomy? No. You have 1 control the other 9. 1 control the other 9 is a dictatorship. So 1 is a dictator over the 9. So you're going to go straight to a parable to know what those 10 kings look like. Ancient Israel will give you that, the 10. And what we can understand through other parables, this is 1. That's just 1. You can go to a second, you can go to 1989 history and see it again. But this one world government, instead of being a deep state where they're all friends, what you see is the United States control the UN as a dictatorship. What we call unilateralism. This requires the coming together of republicanism and Protestantism. Church plus state. And you can prove that. You can see that even just through straight Ellen White quotes. What Protestantism is going to do. Is Protestantism going to work with the UN to bring about a Sunday law? No. Protestantism hates the UN because they see that confederacy and globalism as being what is going to bring about the Antichrist. Republicanism, Protestantism, church and state. We're going to use parables. We can use multiple parables if I list them down here. It's the 1 and the 9 tribes. One over the other. Another parable is what happened in 1989 as we went from 2 superpowers to 1 superpower. And the Gulf War, that's been demonstrated in other videos. Another witness, again, all using parables. World War I plus World War II equals World War III. So, World War I, Kaiser Wilhelm plus Adolf Hitler equals Donald Trump. Now, was Adolf Hitler or Kaiser Wilhelm working with a deep state where all the nations were friends behind the scenes? No. If Hitler would have won World War II, what would you have? You would have a one world government. There would be other governments. It's a too large territory to control himself. But they are subjected under his leadership. It would be, as it was with the tribes, a dictator controlling the others. So World War I, World War II equals World War III. Dictatorship, dictatorship, dictatorship. So these are all parables that will give us a witness for what this would have looked like. So while we all can believe in the idea of a one world government, what that looks like will take you down very different roads. And the conclusion of that, why we've come to a point in 2016 where it splits not just Adventism but also Protestantism, is because now it's visible. If you believe the one world government looks like this, who is Trump to you? If this is your one world government, globalism, the UN, satanic deep states, spreading immorality that you can see through these secret signs, who is Trump to you? Trump is the hero. Trump is the Cyrus. He's the anointed to save you. If you believe in this, that this is what the one world government is built upon, not on conspiracy theories, but using parable teaching, that we have given multiple witnesses that each stand alone. World War II stands alone, but we have scriptural evidences and historical evidences. Then Trump becomes what? Trump becomes the dictator. And everyone who goes down this line of thought will have the wrong understanding about the king, the kingdom, and the external events that tell us what is happening and what is going to happen to the glorious land. So Adventism does not understand the external events. They don't see the destruction of Jerusalem that's coming because they're on this side with Walter Veith, using the methodology and coming to the same core principled conclusions as conservative Protestantism. This side, this is the message of John and Christ in modern Israel that we're learning through parables that are designed to save us from this, to warn us about what's about to happen. And when the Sunday law of our dispensation passes, we won't be over here seeing Trump as the anointed Cyrus, the hero that's to save us from the one world government. We'll see that he is the one world government. So while we have, it can seem that we can come to many of the same conclusions. Someone was afraid last week that I was saying we shouldn't keep the Sabbath anymore. And that was because I'd worded a sentence badly. I'm not saying that. We have the same conclusions. But what it looks like in reality can decide what side at the Sunday law you stand on. That's the message that we're trying to bring to Adventism, we'll bring to Adventism. And the danger is that just like ancient Israel had the mindset of the pagan nations that led them to expect the wrong external events, Adventism has the mindset of socially conservative Protestantism. So next week we're going to have another look at socially conservative Protestantism today under the Trump administration and what they're actually doing right now. And we'll review some of this. Please send in your questions. Please join the media broadcast if you haven't already. And also, if there's some way that you can send in your questions about what we're discussing, because I can see a danger if we move too quickly and certain things aren't understood. So we'll close with a prayer, if you would kneel with me. Dear Father in heaven, thank you for our blessings. Thank you that you have given us your parable teaching, that we can identify correctly that the history that we're walking through. Each one of us, Lord, comes from a background of these theories, of these conspiracy theories, whichever one they are, that there are very few of us who haven't been part of that mindset. I pray that you will help us as we try to discern truth from error, as we try to put in practice the methodology that you've given us. I pray, Lord, that we will be conscious of the need to change even our most cherished belief systems. But as we do that, Lord, may we understand your character better, which is your true design of this message. May we understand how you operate, how you do nothing without telling your people, not through secret handshakes, Lord, but you teach us through your designed methodology, parable teaching. I pray that you will bring us closer into unity as brothers and sisters in this message. Lord, I know that we are all have different questions, but I pray, Lord, that we will look at these things with love and humility, recognizing the changes that you're requiring your people to make, and that we might assist each other hand to hand through this difficult time. And that, Lord, we know that the final The final result of this movement of priests, Lord, is for us not to hold this information to ourselves, but to be able to warn a church that is dangerously far down a wrong path. I pray, Lord, that you will equip us to this end. In Jesus' name, amen.